The way we interpret the world shapes nearly every part of our lives. Every conversation we have, every decision we make, and even the thoughts we allow ourselves to believe stem from the underlying lens through which we see things. This lens is what we often call a mindset. A mindset isn't just a perspective. It's the default operating system that governs how we perceive ourselves, others, and the situations we encounter. Without realizing it, we can carry destructive, limiting patterns of thought that quietly sabotage our progress. They don't scream, they whisper, they show up in hesitation, in doubt, in the quiet quitting of our own dreams. Most of the time, we don't even realize that it's our own thinking that is holding us back. Living without reflecting on your mindset is like sailing without checking the direction of the wind. You can set goals and push forward, but if the wind is against you, or worse, if you're unknowingly steering in the wrong direction, your effort doesn't take you where you need to go. That's why self-awareness is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Noticing your mindset is the beginning of reclaiming control. It's how you start to live a life of intention rather than default. It's how you stop walking paths other people laid down and begin carving your own. And that starts with one question: what's driving the way you think right now? Many people spend years trying to change their results without ever examining their roots. They change jobs, relationships, habits, only to find the same frustrations following them into each new chapter. It feels like nothing's working, but often the real issue is they've never gone deep enough to challenge their internal operating system. They're trying to build a new life on the foundation of an old mindset. And that never lasts. Sustainable change requires a shift not just in action, but in perspective. To understand this better, imagine someone whose whole identity is built around being the person who always achieves. Their worth is tied to output, to recognition, to crossing finish lines. So, even when they succeed, there's a lingering anxiety. What's next? What if this is not enough? What if someone else does it better? Without knowing it, their mindset, this drive for perfection, is constantly keeping them in a loop of exhaustion. On the surface, it might look like ambition, but deep down, it's fear wearing a different costume, fear of inadequacy, fear of slowing down, fear of not being seen as valuable. Now contrast that with someone who sees life as a series of learning opportunities. Their worth isn't tied to outcomes, but to progress. When things don't go according to plan, they don't spiral into self-doubt. Instead, they ask, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from here? Their mindset creates space for movement, for mistakes, for reinvention. That's the power of perspective. The same event can either crush you or teach you, depending on how you see it. We often inherit our mindsets without choosing them. They're shaped by early experiences, by the systems we grow up in, by the voices that surrounded us when we were too young to question their authority. We pick up beliefs like, success means being busy all the time, or you can't trust anyone fully, or you have to always have a plan. These thoughts become the background noise of our adult lives. We don't remember where they came from, but they keep replaying, influencing how we act, how we love, how we lead. But here's the thing, mindsets are not permanent. They're not written in stone. They're more like muscle memory, habits of thought that can be unlearned. And the way we start shifting them is by becoming conscious of them. Awareness is the first step. The next step is curiosity. Instead of judging yourself for having a certain mindset, ask where it came from. Ask what purpose it's trying to serve. Ask whether it's still helping you or quietly hurting you. Sometimes the mindset that helped you survive in one chapter is the very thing holding you back in the next. There's a subtle kind of courage required to question what you've always believed, especially when those beliefs once kept you safe. But growth requires letting go, not recklessly, but consciously. It's about evolving with intention instead of living on autopilot. Because when we don't evolve our mindsets, they evolve us into versions of ourselves we never meant to become. And often, we don't even notice until we wake up one day and realize we're deeply unfulfilled, even though, on paper, everything looks fine. This is the trap of the default life. You follow the map handed to you, go to school, get the job, climb the ladder, and somewhere along the way, you stop asking if the destination still matters. You're moving, you're progressing. But are you becoming who you want to be? That question can be uncomfortable, but it's also powerful. It's the kind of question that starts revolutions, not in the world, but within you. Some of the most damaging mindsets are the ones that seem logical, like the belief that success has to be earned through constant struggle, or that taking care of yourself is selfish, or that you have to be certain before you begin. These thoughts masquerade as wisdom, but they're often rooted in fear. They sound responsible, but they're just another way to stay small, to stay safe, to stay hidden. To escape these traps, you have to stop trying to control the outcome and start getting curious about the process. What if the goal wasn't perfection, but participation? What if success wasn't defined by applause, but by alignment? What if your purpose wasn't something you had to find, but something you could create by showing up, paying attention, and experimenting with what feels real? This shift, from performance to presence, from certainty to curiosity, is the essence of what it means to fix a destructive mindset. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about removing the thoughts that no longer serve you, so who you already are can come to the surface. It's not a makeover, it's a reveal. And one of the most powerful ways to begin this shift is to replace judgment with experimentation. Instead of asking, "Am I doing this right?" ask, "What am I learning?" Instead of wondering, "What if I fail?" ask, "What if this teaches me something valuable?" Life becomes lighter when it becomes a lab. There's no final exam, just trial, feedback, and growth. Imagine how different things would feel if you stopped treating every decision like a test and started treating it like an experiment. You'd be free to try things without fear. You'd be open to changing your mind. You'd give yourself permission to pivot. And most importantly, you'd stop needing everything to work out perfectly. Because the point wouldn't be to succeed every time. The point would be to grow a little more every time. Experiments require curiosity. And curiosity is a muscle that weakens when we don't use it. If you've been stuck in survival mode for a long time, it might feel strange to be curious again. You might have forgotten what it's like to ask, "What if?" without fear. That's okay. You can start small. Curiosity doesn't need a big breakthrough. It just needs a crack in the wall of certainty. A moment where you choose to wonder instead of worry. That's enough to begin. When you approach life experimentally, you stop needing immediate clarity. You realize that clarity is not a prerequisite, it's a result. It comes from doing, from testing, from being in motion. So, you design little pacts with yourself. You try things for a week, you reflect, you adjust, you try again. Over time, this creates a kind of inner trust. Not that everything will always go right, but that even when it doesn't, you'll figure it out. This is how confidence is built, not from being perfect, but from being willing. Willing to try, willing to learn, willing to fail forward. When you stop tying your worth to performance and start tying it to participation, you reclaim your agency. You stop waiting for permission and start giving yourself the authority to begin. Too often we wait. We wait until we're ready, until we're sure, until someone else validates our path. But readiness is a myth. Certainty is an illusion. The only real signal that it's time to begin is your willingness to be present with what's unknown. That's where the real growth lives, not in the outcome, but in your relationship to the unknown. You don't need to know everything right now. You just need to be willing to meet your life where it is, to get curious, to experiment, to let go of the need for perfect answers and start listening for better questions. The kind of questions that lead you not just to success, but to yourself. When you stop trying to control every variable and start exploring instead, you make room for something deeper than productivity. You make space for meaning, not the kind of meaning that's dictated by tradition or by someone else's rulebook, but the kind that you discover in real time, moment by moment, as you step into the unknown and pay attention to what resonates. Curiosity, when nurtured, has the potential to become a compass. It won't give you a fixed destination, but it will help you navigate toward what matters. It will nudge you gently away from things that drain you and pull you closer to things that awaken you. It will help you notice patterns in your joy, in your energy, in your quiet fascination. And these patterns, when you follow them over time, begin to reveal something bigger, your personal definition of purpose. That's why the work of reshaping your mindset isn't just about breaking habits. It's about building trust in your own inner signals. Too often we override those signals. We silence them. We tell ourselves that what we feel doesn't matter as much as what's expected of us, that our dreams are too impractical, that our discomfort is something to push through instead of listen to. And slowly, without meaning to, we become strangers to our own instincts. But when you stop to listen, really listen to what your life is trying to tell you, something shifts. You stop chasing someone else's path and begin walking your own. You stop forcing clarity and begin discovering it. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It often begins in the quiet decision to take a different route home, to read something outside your usual scope, to say yes to something small just because it feels interesting. And as small as those actions are, they carry weight, because they are signals, not to the world, but to yourself, that you are willing to participate in your own becoming. This kind of intentional living requires you to move out of rigid categories. You can't reduce life to a binary of success or failure, good or bad, right or wrong. The moment you begin seeing the world in more nuanced ways, you begin to open up to complexity, and with that complexity comes depth. You start to see that the things you once judged as failures were actually foundations, that the confusion you felt was a sign of growth, not weakness, that not knowing isn't something to be ashamed of. It's a doorway to discovery. Living this way, experimentally, curiously, doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. It means redefining it. Responsibility isn't just about following the rules. It's about responding to your reality. It's about being awake to your actual experience and then choosing actions that are in alignment with that awareness. And when you take responsibility in this way, something powerful happens. You start to experience freedom. Not the freedom of escaping pressure, but the freedom of choosing consciously. This freedom allows you to stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What feels true right now?" And when you act from that place, you become more resilient. Not because things get easier, but because you're no longer fighting yourself. There's no longer a split between your outer actions and your inner knowing, and that alignment gives you strength. It gives you the energy to keep going, even when things get hard. It gives you the clarity to say no when something isn't right. It gives you the courage to keep experimenting, to keep learning, to keep evolving. One of the most radical things you can do is stop performing for approval and start living from authenticity. The world constantly invites us to perform competence, perform happiness, perform progress. But performance is exhausting when it's not rooted in truth. It demands a version of you that isn't fully you. And over time, that kind of disconnection begins to erode your sense of self. But authenticity is different. It's not about being loud or rebellious. It's about being honest. It's about noticing what's real for you in any given moment and honoring that. Not with grand gestures, but with consistent attention. It means showing up in the world without needing to edit yourself to be palatable. It means trusting that who you are, without the mask, without the script, is enough. That trust doesn't come overnight. It comes from evidence, from giving yourself permission to try something different and seeing that the sky doesn't fall. From speaking honestly in one conversation and realizing that it deepened the connection instead of breaking it. From following your curiosity one small step at a time and discovering, to your surprise, that the path begins to unfold. This is what healing your mindset looks like in practice. Not dramatic change, but small, repeated acts of self-trust. It's when you stop assuming that your default thoughts are facts and start challenging them. It's when you stop letting fear sit in the driver's seat. It's when you realize that discomfort isn't a red light. It's often a green light pointing toward growth. You start to get familiar with the terrain of transformation. You learn to sit with uncertainty. You stop trying to map the entire route before you begin, and instead focus on the next step. You learn that clarity isn't a light switch, it's a sunrise. It grows slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you notice that what used to scare you doesn't anymore. That what used to confuse you now makes sense. That what used to hold you back no longer has a grip. But to get there, you need to be willing to unlearn, to challenge beliefs that feel comfortable but are keeping you small, like the belief that vulnerability is weakness, or that you need to earn rest, or that your value is tied to your productivity. These ideas are not truths, they're cultural scripts. And just because something is common doesn't mean it's right. Just because something is familiar doesn't mean it's serving you. Unlearning is uncomfortable because it requires letting go of certainty, but it's also liberating. It's the beginning of real freedom. Not freedom from challenge, but freedom to choose how you meet those challenges. And with each belief you unlearn, you make space for a new truth to take root. A truth that aligns with who you are becoming, not who you used to be. Sometimes that truth comes as a whisper, a quiet knowing that says, "This doesn't feel right anymore." Other times, it hits you all at once, like a wave crashing over everything you thought was stable. Either way, it's a call to pay attention, a call to begin again. And answering that call doesn't require you to have everything figured out. It just requires you to say yes to the process. In that process, failure becomes less threatening. You stop seeing it as a verdict and start seeing it as feedback. You realize that messing up doesn't mean you're not cut out for this. It means you're in motion, and motion is where all growth begins. When you experiment, you learn not just what works, but who you are. You learn what lights you up, what drains you, what matters enough to keep showing up for. And this learning shapes you in ways no textbook ever could. That's why experimenting isn't just a method, it's a mindset, a way of approaching life that says, I'm willing to try, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to change. And when you live this way, you stop needing everything to go according to plan, because you're no longer attached to a single outcome. You're committed to the process. You're committed to staying in relationship with your life, even when it surprises you, even when it challenges you. This is how you build a life that feels alive, not one that looks good from the outside, but one that feels good on the inside. A life that isn't dictated by fear or by obligation, but by intention. A life where you can look back and say, I didn't just exist. I lived, I tried, I grew, I changed. And the beautiful thing is that this kind of life doesn't require a complete overhaul. It starts small, with one new question, one conscious decision, one experiment, one moment where you choose curiosity over certainty, and then another, and another, until slowly your mindset begins to shift, not because you forced it, but because you allowed it. This is the quiet, powerful work of transformation. It's not always visible from the outside, but inside, you feel lighter, more honest, more present. And that presence, that connection to your real self, is what makes everything else possible. When you begin living with intention, it doesn't mean you suddenly have all the answers. What it really means is, you've decided to stop living by default. You've chosen awareness over autopilot, and that choice, quiet and simple as it might seem, changes everything. Because once you start noticing your patterns, once you start questioning the beliefs you've been carrying around without even realizing it, you can't go back to who you were. You've stepped into a new way of seeing, and from there, the journey unfolds, step by step, thought by thought. There's a kind of invisible architecture behind every life. It's made up of small, consistent decisions, unspoken assumptions, and emotional habits. Most of us live in that structure without questioning it. We decorate it, we optimize it, but we rarely ask if it's the right structure for the kind of life we want to build. Becoming conscious of your mindset is how you begin to re-architect your inner world. It's how you stop just upgrading your furniture and instead start laying a new foundation. The stories we tell ourselves shape the limits of our lives. If you've always believed that you're someone who gives up too easily, you might not even attempt things that matter to you. If you think you're not creative, you won't even notice the ideas that try to bubble up from the edges of your mind. And if you've accepted that you're just someone who can't change, then you probably won't. But what if those stories aren't facts? What if they're just outdated narratives that no longer apply? That's where curiosity becomes your ally. Not just curiosity about the world, but curiosity about yourself. Why do I react that way? Why do I always hesitate when I want to speak up? Why does this situation drain me, while that one energizes me? When you ask these questions with compassion rather than criticism, you begin to access a deeper layer of insight. You start to see that your habits, your reactions, your fears, they're not who you are. They're responses, adaptations. They were formed in a context, and if your context has changed, your responses can too. One of the most overlooked forms of self-care is changing your internal dialogue. The way you speak to yourself matters. It shapes your emotional environment. It either encourages growth or reinforces fear. Many people are more kind to strangers than they are to themselves. They speak with harshness, doubt, and shame inside their own mind. But that inner voice isn't destiny, it's programming. And just like any script, it can be rewritten. Start small. Notice when your inner voice is replaying an old script. Maybe it says, "You're not good enough," or "This always happens to you," or "You'll never figure this out." Then pause. And instead of fighting that thought, ask where it came from. Whose voice does it remind you of? When did you first start believing that? Most of the time, those thoughts were planted in moments of vulnerability, when you were young, uncertain, or overwhelmed. They were never objective truths, just protective mechanisms that overstayed their welcome. Rewriting your internal dialogue isn't about becoming blindly positive. It's about becoming honest. It's about replacing judgment with observation. Instead of saying, "I'm failing," you say, "This is hard, and I'm learning." Instead of saying, "I'm behind," you say, "I'm moving at my own pace." This subtle shift in language has powerful effects. It creates space for growth, for patience, for experimentation. And most importantly, it reminds you that your worth is not conditional. Another critical element of fixing a destructive mindset is redefining your relationship with uncertainty. Many of us were taught to fear the unknown, to avoid risk, to seek stability at all costs. But life doesn't operate that way. Growth requires discomfort. Progress requires uncertainty. The very things we try to avoid are often the gateways to the things we deeply want: fulfillment, discovery, connection. These things don't live inside your comfort zone. They live just outside of it. So how do you build a mindset that can hold space for uncertainty without collapsing under it? You practice. You start treating the unknown not as a threat, but as a signal, a sign that you're expanding, a sign that you're doing something real, something meaningful. You build your tolerance for ambiguity one small step at a time. You try something new without knowing how it will turn out. You start a conversation even if it feels awkward. You commit to a project even if the path forward isn't fully clear. And in doing so, you build resilience, not just emotional toughness, but inner flexibility, the ability to bend without breaking, to stretch into the new without losing your core. People often think resilience means pushing through, but real resilience isn't force, it's fluidity. It's knowing when to rest, when to adjust, when to let go. A healthy mindset isn't about grinding endlessly. It's about moving wisely. It's about pacing yourself in a way that is sustainable, that honors your energy, your rhythms, your limits. This doesn't mean giving up when things get hard. It means being strategic with your effort, protecting your spark, preserving your capacity to stay in the game for the long haul. And the truth is, your mindset doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's shaped by your environment, the people you spend time with, the stories you consume, the culture that surrounds you. If you're constantly surrounded by negativity, comparison, and cynicism, it's going to be difficult to maintain a mindset of hope and curiosity. That's why curating your inputs is not a luxury. It's a responsibility. Choose what nourishes you. Choose what energizes you. Choose conversations that challenge and expand you rather than shrink you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is protect your energy from people who drain it. Set boundaries not just with others, but with your own habits. Notice when you're numbing rather than processing, when you're scrolling instead of reflecting, when you're avoiding instead of confronting. These moments are not failures, they're invitations. Opportunities to ask, what am I really needing right now? What would support me in this moment? Support doesn't always look like discipline. Sometimes it looks like softness, like rest, like allowing yourself to feel what you feel without rushing to fix it. Your mindset is not just shaped in moments of action. It's shaped in moments of stillness, in the quiet spaces where you sit with yourself and simply allow what is. Those moments build trust. They teach you that you don't need to perform to be worthy, that your presence alone is enough. And when you begin to trust yourself, genuinely, deeply, you stop outsourcing your decisions to other people. You stop looking for approval in places that never really see you. You stop bending yourself into shapes that were never meant for you. You begin to lead yourself, gently, boldly, compassionately. And from that inner leadership, everything else begins to align. You start choosing your goals differently, not based on what looks good, but based on what feels aligned. You stop chasing status and start seeking fulfillment. You stop obsessing over timelines and start focusing on your trajectory. Because growth isn't always fast. It's not always linear. Sometimes it's underground, quiet, invisible, but powerful. And when you trust the process, you give yourself the gift of staying rooted while you evolve. It's easy to believe that fixing your mindset requires a complete transformation, but most of the time, it's about returning to the parts of you that got buried under pressure, under expectations, under fear, returning to your curiosity, to your courage, to your capacity for wonder. These parts of you were never lost, just forgotten, and they are waiting, patiently, to be remembered. Remembering who you are doesn't mean returning to who you used to be. It means coming home to your essence, the part of you that exists beneath all the noise, the part of you that knows, without needing proof, that you are capable of growth, that you are allowed to evolve, that you don't need to stay small to stay safe. You can live differently, you can think differently, you can believe something new, and you don't need permission to begin. All you need is one moment of awareness, one breath of honesty, one act of courage. The rest will unfold from there. Real change rarely arrives with fanfare. It begins quietly, often invisibly, in the shift of a single thought. A moment where you catch yourself before reacting. A pause where you question, not just what you're doing, but why. These moments, small, subtle, carry the potential to redirect your entire path. Not because they solve everything, but because they mark a turning point. A decision to move forward with awareness, rather than on autopilot. By now, you've seen how much of life is shaped not by events, but by the meaning we assign to them. Two people can face the same challenge and walk away with entirely different stories. One sees failure, the other sees feedback. One shuts down, the other grows stronger. The difference isn't luck, it's mindset. It's the story you choose to tell yourself about what the moment means. And stories are powerful, not because they're always true, but because we live by them. We filter reality through them. We make choices, take risks, and shrink back from opportunities, all based on the stories looping in the background. But here's the good news. If a story can be told, it can be rewritten. You are not locked into the first version of your narrative. You're allowed to update it. You're allowed to revise your understanding of yourself. You're allowed to grow out of old roles, to evolve beyond past definitions. This isn't inconsistency, it's growth. Evolution requires shedding. It demands that you release what no longer fits, even if it once felt safe. Growth also asks you to embrace something many people spend their lives avoiding: change. Not just external change, but internal flexibility. The willingness to be wrong, to shift direction, to admit when an old way of thinking isn't working anymore. This kind of honesty is hard, but it's the gateway to freedom. Freedom to choose again, to try again, to start again. Because starting over isn't failure. It's a decision to no longer settle. It's a statement. I'm willing to live aligned, even if it means being uncomfortable for a while. Comfort can be deceptive. It lulls you into stagnation. It whispers, stay here, it's safe, even when here is a place of quiet dissatisfaction. Real joy, real fulfillment lives just outside that comfort, not in chaos, not in recklessness, but in intentional stretch, in the willingness to go just a bit further, to explore what's possible, to discover who you are when you're not shrinking. Your mindset is your daily companion. It's with you in moments of pressure, in conversations that matter, in decisions that define you. You carry it into every room you walk into. So, the work of tending to your mindset is not optional, it's foundational. And like any foundation, it must be revisited, reinforced, sometimes even rebuilt. The best time to begin that work is always now. Not next week, not when things calm down, not when you feel more ready. The work begins the moment you stop waiting for permission, the moment you realize that your life is too valuable to be lived on someone else's terms. This doesn't mean you have to do everything at once. It means you commit to one honest step at a time, one shift in language, one moment of presence, one decision to replace fear with curiosity. These choices, small as they seem, begin to add up. They form momentum, they shape identity, and over time, that identity becomes someone who experiments, who grows, who adapts. Someone who trusts the process, even when the outcome is uncertain. Someone who values alignment more than achievement. Someone who knows that failure is part of progress, and discomfort is a sign of transformation, not danger. You can be that person, not all at once, but little by little, with grace, with persistence, with self-compassion. The kind of compassion that understands you won't always get it right, but you're willing to keep going anyway. There's no final destination, no moment when you'll be done evolving. That's not the point. The point is to stay connected, to remain awake, to show up for your life, not just in the big milestones, but in the quiet, ordinary spaces where real growth happens. So, if you're waiting for a sign, let this be it. If you've been hesitating, doubting, second-guessing, Let this be your reminder that you already have what it takes. Not because you're certain, but because you're willing. Willing to begin again, willing to get curious, willing to believe that change is possible. Your mindset isn't a prison, it's a tool, and in your hands it can become a doorway, not just to better results, but to a richer, more connected way of living. So, walk through that door. Let this be the start of something new, something more true, something fully, finally yours.